The name of R.S. Lewis is Scott. R.S. Scott is involved in it. As you can see, he's the original hipster, the original Ottawa hipster. He was mayor only for 1 year in 1852, but he does two amazing things for the growth of the city. First of all, after he's mayor in 1857, he writes the letter that is sent to Queen Victoria asking if it's possible for Ottawa to become the capital of the Canadas. And he goes down to, Ottawa had just been through a depression at this point, he goes down to Lac Champlain in that area, and he's asking the lumber barons down there if they will come up and take the waterfront lots that we have to establish their sawmills, etc. And he also says that if they do come up and bid on them, these waterfront lots, they will be unopposed. So there we go, a little bit. So he does that. He founded the Temperance Society, although he had, did you know this? He had his own wine cellar. He had his own wine. He's also vegetarian, but didn't consider chicken as to be a meat. But he does those two things, which if you think about it, the founding of the timber trade and the eventually writing the letter that led to the proclamation by Queen Victoria of us becoming the capital, and he did it, he was only mayor for a year. So I mean, I salute Mayor Scott. Also, by the way, anybody who's ever worked with or for Scott Nayland, the law firm, it's him. He was a lawyer. He started it. And my father actually worked there in the 50s. So this is our present coat of arms. 1855, we become a city. And this is actually the only reference to the natives. It's an oar, a paddle, and two arrows. Here we can see the maple leaf starting to appear. Here's the lumberjack. This is a pine tree, pine all over the place. When they first started coming up here, the lumber barons, they must have taken one look at these 120-foot straight pines and started rubbing their hands together. Because the first thing you do is like, that's a mast. It's perfect for a mast, you know, 120 feet straight up like that. Maple's at 80 feet. And of course, as I've just said, Scott has invited these guys up. So there we are, we've become a city. And then a mere 2 years later, oh, I beg your pardon. So when we become a city, this is Pittman-Lett. He's our first city, I'm going to say clerk. Well, I usually say Clark. From 1855 right through. He's a poet. You can check out his long poem describing the early, it's called Recollections of Early Bytown, that you can check out. It's long, but he also he's very much involved in theater and was involved in, as I showed you, the Her Majesty's Theatre. He's involved in writing plays that were put on there. Very first play in Ottawa was in the soldiers in Barracks Hill, which is where Parliament is now, which is where the soldiers were stationed for the Rideau Canal. And it was called, catch this, it was called The Village Lawyer. And it was about a corrupt lawyer, then as now. And of course now the lawyers themselves put on a play every year. So if you get the chance to check out William Pittman-Lett, Lett Street, yeah. And he's a long-time city clerk. He's guiding through, for instance, some of the early the early bylaws that we passed through, that you weren't allowed to run pigs in the street anymore. That's one of them. Yeah. I think it still stands in case anybody was thinking. Yeah. Sorry? Okay. And then there we are. As I say, there was a lot of it's kind of like grabbing the Olympics, competing for the Olympics as to which town should become the permanent capital of the Dominion of Canada. Several events, and there's our original coat of arms for Ottawa.
They replaced the woman with the soldier.
Yes, exactly. Although I have to say that it's a fairly androgynous looking soldier. Yeah? Let's say it's a woman. But it's Ma Firth dressed up as a... And so we've got the scales of justice, and instead of a lumberjack, we have an ironsmith, a train, some deer, the Rideau Canal locks, and the bridge, the Chaudière Bridge, over in it. I would prefer that actually as the. But what's missing? Exactly. There's no mention of native. Whereas in the one we have now, there's at least a token mention of the natives. So somebody needs to petition, and as we saw, it's Scott. But the person that had a big hand in it was the Governor General at the time, whose name was Head, so Edmund Head, and he pushed for Ottawa to become the capital. His wife was a watercolorist, and Lady Head, and had painted several portraits of Ottawa as a beautiful setting for a capital. And they were actually taken over to Victoria, who saw them and said, very pretty, we are amused. And then finally she says in 1857, she says, okay, and there's she sends over a letter saying, yes, okay, Ottawa can be the capital. Now, the real reason they chose it, of course, is that they're still nervous about the Americans coming up for another go at trying to conquer us. And they thought, well, let's put the capital where the Americans will never be able to find it.
That's right.
Which is actually why we're the capital.
That's true.
Christmas Day, 1854, the Bytown and Prescott Railway arrives from Prescott into Bytown. There was an old station on Sussex that it pulled into. It sort of looped around the top of Ottawa and came in. And this is necessary because the lumber barons are starting getting fired. We'll have a look more at the lumber barons. If you wanted to describe the history of Ottawa in a bumper sticker, it would be from lumber to legislation. But the lumber barons they've got all this wood and they need to get it out fast down into America, where the big towns, Boston and New York, need timber. They've harvested everything around themselves. But this is actually the Ottawa. This is the train, the Ottawa. I'm sorry you can't see it, but it says Ottawa. And it's pulling into the Sussex McTaggart. McTaggart was the street that it was on the corner of Sussex and McTaggart was the train station. So this is going to absolutely revolutionize and assist the growth of Ottawa, as we will see becomes the largest conglomerate, next time we will see, becomes the largest conglomerate of sawmills in the world. And we're going to meet some people like Booth, who had the biggest holdings in the world of timber. So we'll see that in the next lecture, which I hope we'll all be able to come to, including me. I just threw this one in because, given the times that we're in now, the idea of, it's funny when you talk with, I did a play with Albert Dumont, who's the poet laureate of Ottawa, and I remember we were talking, and he was talking about reconciliation, and he said, when exactly did we reconcile? He's got a point. But we've come a long way from this. Can you read what sorry, I'm blocking you. Can you read it? Awatanuk's celebrated troop of Rocky Mountain Indians, consisting of warriors and squaws, will give their last entertainment in Ottawa at the theatre Friday night, October the 24th. The chief has been induced to make the change from the Temperance Hall to the theatre on this, his last night, on account of the limited accommodations of the hall and the large crowds gathering to witness these unique exhibitions. So it's basically a vaudeville entertainment involving, and some of the actors in the troupe are not actually native. They're, and they would put red on. I mean, for heaven's sake. But underneath is interesting as well, because there's a lecture by by Dr. Van Cortlandt, Edwin Van Cortlandt. Van Cortlandt was the first doctor to set up in Ottawa, and he also started our first museum in his house. He had a little museum in his house. He was also famous for, he walked with a cane, and he liked to flick the hats off schoolboys as they went past him. But he also was brought over when, it now turns out that it was over in Hull, but while they were taking sand for the building of one of the bridges, they came across some bones, a pile of bones, and mixed bones, but that had ochre stain on them, and it's a native burial site, probably a disease burial site. But one of them was a chief. Obviously, he's laid out perfectly, and he's around 6'2" from the bones. And Van Cortlandt was brought over to describe it, which he did, but he didn't say where it was. And it wasn't until maybe 10 years ago that somebody from the Citizen finally worked out that it was actually over in Hull. They thought it was where the National Library is now, but it was actually over in Hull. So, but evidence of a burial ground on this side, if you remember, I said at the beginning we don't have any evidence. We don't, because it's actually over in Hull. But for a while, this was considered evidence of the fact that there had been habitation by the natives on this side. I love these. This is known as a bird's eye view. This is around 1859. Looking, the talent to be able to do that, because it's pure imagination. Yeah, I think yeah, absolutely lovely. We can see that the timber trade has not really got going yet. This is LeBreton Flats. Still, we don't have a parliament yet. There's still Barracks Hill. Although you can see that Lower Town is laid out in a perfect grid. By laid it out in a grid, and it's stuck to it. Tucked up in here is the, by now we've got steamers going daily down to Montreal, and the wharf was in there. You can't quite see it in there. So this is just before the timber trade really starts to take off, and also the arrival of the Parliament buildings. So we become, yeah, I know. Yeah, this is Thomas Fuller, who was the chief architect of the Dominion at the time, and he's in charge of designing and building our first set of Parliament buildings. So Barracks Hill that I just showed you is now going to become the Parliament buildings. The Prince of Wales, Edward, comes over in 1860 and is involved in laying the first stone of the new Parliament buildings. By then, Ruggles Wright had also built a timber slide in because his father had by then a pretty growing timber trade, and which is still there, the timber slide that runs through the Chaudière Islands, just on the other side of the War Museum. There's a canal there. That used to be the timber slide, and it was famous for people taking a run down it. And there's a painting of the Prince of Wales sitting there with a big smile on his face. I don't know what color trousers he was wearing at the time, but he's of him. And this was a famous thing to do, was to go down the timber slide when you were visiting Ottawa, and he did. And there they are under construction, the Parliament buildings. And I think I will leave it there to see if anybody has any questions. And if you don't mind, I'm going to sing another song. Colonel By's daughter was called Harriet. And she traveled on the Rideau, which had previously been the pumper, the Rideau steamship. She traveled up from Kingston when they were opening it. So I wrote a song for Harriet. My name is Harriet By, my father, Colonel John, built the Rideau Canal out of earth and wood and stone. I remember days in the Canadas as a place where I was told, like me in the 1830s, it was but a few years old. On a hill between waterfalls, we lived while my father toiled, carving out of the wilderness in the service of the crown. Then came a celebration day, and to Kingstown we repaired to board the maiden Rideau and steam St. Lawrence to Ottawa. The band played Three Cheers Rose Up as we passed through Kingston Mills. At Indian Lake the tribe stood by with a feu de joie. I was thrilled when 36 came aboard. A woodland boy and I stood silent at the rail while the chief shook father's hand. At Smith Falls a mighty cannon greeted the Rideau by way of hail. Then promptly it blew up, and quickly away we did sail. Then a week after leaving Kingstown, May 28th, 1832, we reached the Ottawa River, and the Rideau's whistle blew. My name is Harriet By, my father, Colonel John, built the Rideau Canal from earth and wood and stone. Isn't that a lovely picture? Yeah. Now here's the Parliament buildings now complete. This is the old Sappers Bridge, which was the original bridge on the canal that Colonel By built. Sappers being the people, they're like navvies, people that, engineers, most of them Irish. People like Mackay, Thomas Mackay, etc., who was a stonemason. And then this was built, and this was the Dufferin Bridge. And now it's the Plaza Bridge. You can see where we are. That building is still there. That little building is still there. Now one of the oldest stone buildings because Colonel By had it built. This building here is the old post office. So, forgive me, I'm just going to... There you're going into Spark Street, but Elgin's behind here. Do you see now what I'm talking about? Elgin's behind here. So this is the old post office. Of course, the more Art Deco post office is next to it down here. But this building here is the Russell House Hotel. Now the Russell House, by the way, you can see this is actually a hay cart. He's moving at the time, but those are two horses. It's a hay cart going along. Not rush hour, by the looks of it. Not rush hour. The Russell House, this is the gentleman who introduced the streetcar. Previous to that, previous to the electrification of transport, there was the Ottawa track railway or road railway, and it was basically a carriage pulled by horses. And they became quite a large company. It's sort of the Uber of its day. But Ahern starts, he goes and buys a couple of carriages, and this is the inaugural 1895. This is the inaugural opening of the line. The first one going down Bank Street as far as Abbotsford House, which is where, that's why Abbotsford House is there. Do you know the old person's home that's down there? Well, that was the last stop down there. But the main contribution that the streetcar makes to Ottawa is the suburb. The suburb. Before, you had to be able to walk or horse to work, so you had to get up pretty early. With the streetcar, away you go. You can get up a little bit later, hop on the streetcar, head downtown, and go to work. Notice the facial hair? Every one of them's got this big mustache that... so they're the hipsters of their day, but it's come back. It's come back, the facial hair. And they're all wearing a hat. The thing you notice in these old photographs is how many people are wearing hats. Doesn't come back until the baseball cap, really. I remember going into the town cinema, and there was a movie called Hoop Dreams. It was about basketball. And I thought, why is the entire audience facing the wrong way? And they were all jocks with their baseball caps on, turned the other way. But just a little historical aside, I like these. Who made the hat disappear? Kennedy. Jack Kennedy was the first president not to wear a hat. And it got taken up, and that's why all of us here. Did you miss an episode? Then go to rogerstv.com and watch The History of Ottawa, according to Phil Jenkins, online anytime. Thanks for watching.